Arise, O Zion, your light has come. The Sabbath kingdom has begun.
What if Isaiah 65 is not describing the final eternal world in the way many have assumed? What if the prophet is seeing two stages within one revelation, the restoration of creation during the millennium, and beyond it, the final new heaven and new earth after death, darkness, and every remaining enemy have been permanently destroyed? Isaiah speaks of extraordinary longevity, families, houses, vineyards, fruitful labor, judgment, and even the serpent remaining beneath the sign of its humiliation. Yet Revelation presents something different at the end of the prophetic timeline. Death is destroyed, the final judgment has taken place, and New Jerusalem descends. That difference raises the central question of this investigation. Does Isaiah 65 describe the final new heaven and new earth in their completed condition? Or does the prophet also reveal a restorative age that precedes the final consummation? The question comes directly from the conditions Isaiah describes. Human life is extraordinarily prolonged, but death remains. Children are born. Generations continue, people build houses, cultivate vineyards, and enjoy the work of their hands. The sinner remains distinguishable from the righteous, and the serpent remains beneath the ancient sign of its humiliation. These details cannot simply be erased because Isaiah announces a new heaven and a new earth. The title gives us the prophetic horizon, but the conditions within the vision may reveal different stages inside that horizon. This does not require two new heavens and new earths. It may instead reveal one prophetic movement, restoration first, followed by final consummation. And this brings us to a principle that will guide the entire investigation. Prophetic proximity does not always mean chronological proximity. Events may appear beside one another within a prophetic vision while belonging to different stages in the unfolding purpose of Adonai. To investigate this possibility, we will compare Isaiah with Revelation and Ezekiel, and then examine the Hebrew testimony, the Peshitta, the Septuagint, the Syriac tradition, the Ethiopian scriptures, the Targum, Midrash, rabbinic interpretation, and the Zohar. Each witness will contribute only what it genuinely preserves. Our purpose is not to defend an inherited theological system or create another religious structure. We will follow the internal evidence of the visions and allow the prophetic order to emerge from the testimony itself. Let us begin with the first clue. Isaiah describes a world in which life is greatly prolonged, but death has not yet disappeared. This investigation began with an understanding received through the Ruah, but spiritual revelation must be examined through the written testimony. Scripture often unfolds a mystery progressively. One passage introduces a pattern, another expands it, another places it within the prophetic timeline, and another reveals its completion. For this reason, we will not require the entire pattern to appear in one isolated sentence before it can be recognized. We will gather the witnesses and allow their relationship to become visible. The internal conditions of each vision will guide the investigation. A prophetic title cannot erase the world described beneath it. The prophetic title announces the horizon, but the internal characteristics reveal the stage being described within that horizon. We will then compare the ancient textual witnesses to determine whether significant details remain stable across different languages and streams of transmission. Throughout the study, we will distinguish what a passage states directly from the conclusions that emerge when the witnesses and prophetic chronology are assembled together. With this method established, we can now turn to Isaiah 65 and examine the first clue within the vision. With the purpose established and the method before us, we now turn to the passage itself. The investigation begins where the question itself was born, within the closing vision of Isaiah. For generations, Isaiah's final prophecy has commonly been understood as describing the completed new heaven and new earth. At first reading, this conclusion appears natural. The prophet announces a renewed creation in which the former troubles are forgotten, inviting the reader to think immediately of the everlasting kingdom. Yet the internal evidence presents an important question. Isaiah describes a world transformed beneath the government of Adonai. Human life is greatly prolonged, yet mortality remains. The prophet describes a person dying at 100 years of age as though such a death were unusually early. Human life has therefore been restored toward extraordinary length, but death itself has not disappeared. This became the first major clue. Isaiah is certainly not describing the present fallen condition of humanity. Life has been profoundly restored beyond anything presently known, but neither does this condition resemble the final order described in Revelation, where death itself is abolished. The distinction is important. Isaiah does not describe ordinary mortality. He describes restored mortality, life dramatically extended beneath divine blessing, while death has not yet surrendered its final claim upon creation. This observation does not by itself establish the entire prophetic timeline, but it gives us something concrete to follow. If the vision contains both extraordinary restoration and continuing mortality, then we must examine its remaining characteristics before deciding where it belongs. And Isaiah gives us many more. Children continue to be born. Generations continue. People build and cultivate. Labor remains. Inheritance remains. And even the serpent remains beneath the ancient sign of its humiliation. The investigation, therefore, moves deeper into Isaiah's vision. What kind of world is the prophet actually describing? The next observation leads us deeper into Isaiah's vision. Having seen that Isaiah describes a world in which human life is greatly prolonged, but death has not yet been abolished, we now turn to the conditions of ordinary life within the same vision. The prophet does not describe humanity abandoning the created order. He presents embodied life continuing beneath extraordinary divine blessing. People build houses and inhabit them. They plant vineyards and enjoy their fruit. Children are born. Generations continue. The people delight in the work of their hands rather than watching strangers possess what they have built and cultivated. These details reveal a world in which the structures of human life remain, while the curse resting upon them is being reversed. Labor is no longer consumed by futility. Inheritance is no longer continually lost through violence and oppression. Households flourish beneath stability and protection. The land yields its abundance, and those who cultivate it enjoy its fruit in peace. Isaiah, therefore, does not describe the disappearance of created life. He describes its restoration. Human society continues to develop. Families, cultivation, labor, land, and inheritance remain, but they now exist beneath righteous government. This is another important indication that Isaiah is describing an inhabited world undergoing restoration rather than the final eternal order in which every stage of that work has already been completed. The millennium is not an empty spiritual interval or merely a heavenly condition detached from the earth. It is the appointed age in which Adonai restores creation through righteous government. The land is healed, the nations are instructed, justice is established, human life flourishes. Isaiah's vision, therefore, does not describe creation being abandoned. It describes creation being recovered. Houses, vineyards, descendants, labor, land, and inheritance remain, while the violence, dispossession, futility, and shortened life of the fallen order are overturned beneath the government of Adonai. This second observation strengthens the conclusion already emerging from the vision. Isaiah is not describing the end of creation's story, but the great work of restoration that precedes final and everlasting consummation. The serpent remains beneath the sign of judgment. Another detail inside Isaiah's vision now demands attention. The prophet concludes the description of restored creation by returning to the ancient image of the serpent. Dust shall be the serpent's meat. The serpent has not disappeared from the vision. It remains beneath the sign first pronounced in Eden. This is significant because Isaiah does not describe the serpent as exercising the dominion it possessed within the fallen order. Its condition is one of humiliation and restraint. Yet its continued presence also indicates that the final removal of darkness has not yet occurred. The image therefore fits the same pattern already emerging from the rest of the chapter. Death remains but greatly weakened. The curse is being reversed, but its final removal has not yet been completed. The serpent remains but beneath judgment. Isaiah's renewed world is therefore not a return to the present fallen condition. Neither is it yet the final order in which the adversary has received irreversible judgment and can never appear again. This detail prepares us to turn to Revelation, where the chronology of restraint, release, and final judgment becomes much clearer. We now turn to the book of Revelation. Having examined the internal characteristics of Isaiah's vision, we now compare them with the chronology presented in Revelation. If Isaiah is describing the same prophetic hope that reaches its completion in the final new heaven and new earth, then Revelation should help us determine where his vision belongs within the larger timeline. The sequence is clear. Before the final new heaven and new earth, Yochanan describes the 1,000-year reign. During this period, the adversary is restrained from deceiving the nations as before, and creation enters an age of restoration beneath the government of Adonai. Yet the prophetic record does not end there. At the conclusion of the 1,000 years, the adversary is released for a final period of testing. The last rebellion follows, judgment is completed, and death itself is destroyed. Only then does Yochanan behold the new heaven, the new earth, and new Jerusalem descending from heaven. This comparison resolves the tension inside Isaiah's vision. Isaiah and Revelation are not competing descriptions of the same moment. They present different stages within one continuous work of Adonai. Isaiah presents the prophetic horizon. Revelation unfolds the chronology contained within that horizon. Isaiah describes creation while restoration is advancing. Revelation shows what follows after that work reaches its appointed completion. This explains why Isaiah can present extraordinary blessing, while death, generations, labor, and the humbled serpent remain. Those conditions belong naturally to a world being restored beneath divine government. They do not belong to the final order in which death has disappeared and every enemy has received permanent judgment. The 1,000-year reign is therefore neither the present fallen world nor the final eternal kingdom. It is the appointed age of restoration, transition, righteous government, and testing through which Adonai prepares creation for everlasting completion. Darkness no longer governs the nations as before. It has been restrained, but not yet permanently destroyed. Its release after the 1,000 years confirms that the restorative work has not yet reached its final conclusion. Only after the last testing, final judgment, and the destruction of death does the completed order appear. There are not two new heavens and new earths. There is one final and everlasting order, preceded by the restorative reign through which creation is prepared for it. Prophetic proximity does not always mean chronological proximity. A prophet may behold restoration and consummation within one continuous vision without identifying every stage that lies between them. With the prophetic sequence established, another question now comes into view. What is Adonai actually accomplishing during this restorative reign? The nature of the restorative kingdom. The prophetic testimony presents an active kingdom. The millennium is not a pause between the present age and eternity, nor is it the final perfection of creation. It is the appointed age in which Adonai restores what has been broken, heals what has been wounded, gathers what has been scattered, and prepares creation for its everlasting inheritance. The land is restored, the nations receive instruction, justice is established, peace increases throughout creation. Households, inheritance, labor in the land are returned to the order intended from the beginning. This is not the abandonment of creation, it is the recovery of creation. The millennium is also a time of testing. Darkness no longer exercises dominion over the nations as before. It has been restrained, but Revelation shows that its permanent destruction still lies ahead. At the conclusion of the 1,000 years, the adversary is released. This final testing exposes what remains before evil receives irreversible judgment. The millennium should therefore not be understood merely as an age of peace. It is the great restorative reign in which creation is healed beneath righteous government while moving toward its final completion. This leads naturally to the next question: who governs the restorative kingdom? The government of the restorative kingdom. Throughout the prophets, the healing of the land, the gathering of the scattered, the instruction of the nations, and the restoration of justice are inseparable from the return of righteous government. The reign of Adonai and his anointed appears together with another recurring prophetic theme. Zion rises, Jerusalem rejoices, and the former dominion returns. Micah gives this movement unusual clarity. And thou, O tower of the flock, the stronghold of the daughter of Zion, unto thee shall it come, even the former dominion. The kingdom shall come to the daughter of Jerusalem. The direction of the prophecy is important. The dominion comes to her, the kingdom comes to the daughter. She does not create this authority independently from Adonai, nor does she replace the king. Rather, the prophecy places her within the reception and administration of the restored dominion. This is where Malkut becomes essential to the investigation. Malkut is not merely territory. It is kingdom, sovereignty, and royal dominion made present within creation. During the restorative age, it becomes the encompassing order through which gathering, healing, instruction, judgment, and the restoration of inheritance are carried forward. Within the framework we have been following, this governmental relationship must also be understood in light of what has already taken place before the millennium begins. The heavenly wedding and royal coronation precede the restorative reign. The male Messiah and the daughter therefore enter this age not as two royal powers awaiting union, but as husband and wife carrying distinct offices within one royal household. This helps explain why we understand the Yosef kingdom, the northern kingdom, associated with the male Messiah's royal administration, as operating within Malkut during the restorative age, rather than beside her as a competing kingdom. Malkut encompasses the work of restoration. Within her, the male Messiah exercises his distinct royal authority. His kingdom has not disappeared, nor has his authority been transferred to the daughter. The distinction is one of office and administration, not competing sovereignty. The daughter carries the restorative administration of Malkut, gathering, healing, ordering, nourishing, and preparing the inheritance. The male Messiah reigns within that order through the royal administration associated with the Yosef kingdom. Together as husband and wife, they carry the restorative government toward its appointed completion. The millennium should therefore not be understood as two independent kingdoms existing side by side. It is a nested royal order. Malkut encompasses the restorative kingdom, while the Yosef kingdom operates within it through the distinct royal office of the male Messiah. This arrangement also explains why the final and irreversible union belongs beyond the millennium. During the restorative age, darkness still awaits its final judgment, death has not yet been destroyed, and division has not yet become impossible. Only after the final rebellion, the destruction of death, and the removal of every enemy does the kingdom enter its everlasting fullness. This conclusion emerges as the prophetic witnesses are placed together. Isaiah describes the restoration, Revelation supplies the chronology, Micah announces the return of the former dominion to the daughter. The prophets unite the reign of the king with the restoration of Zion. Together within this interpretation, they present a royal household governing creation through distinct but united offices as restoration moves toward completion. This version preserves the unique idea we almost lost, not merely that Ishu reigns inside Malkut, but that the Yosef Northern Royal Administration functions within Malkut after the heavenly royal union has already been established. The testimony of Ezekiel completes the pattern. Ezekiel's closing vision presents the same restorative movement. The dry bones rise, the people are restored, the land is renewed, the glory of Adonai returns, the sanctuary stands among the people, a river flows outward, bringing healing wherever it goes. The tribes receive their appointed inheritance. The vision concludes Adonai is there. These are the characteristics of a world being restored. Life is returning. The land is being healed. Divine government is established. The presence of Adonai dwells among his people again. Yet Ezekiel's vision still belongs to restoration in progress. The sanctuary remains. The land is measured. The tribes receive inheritance. The river continues flowing outward to heal. These conditions describe a kingdom actively restoring creation, not the final order in which nothing remains to be healed or arranged. This distinction clarifies the relationship between Ezekiel's sanctuary and New Jerusalem. New Jerusalem is not merely another earthly city replacing Ezekiel's order. In Revelation, the city is revealed as the bride, the wife of the Lamb. She is a living royal reality. Her descent is not merely the arrival of architecture, it is the manifestation of completed victory, everlasting inheritance, and the permanent dwelling of Adonai with humanity. Ezekiel's sanctuary belongs to the restorative kingdom. New Jerusalem belongs to the completed kingdom. Isaiah presents restoration advancing. Ezekiel presents the restored order established beneath the returning presence of Adonai. Revelation unfolds the chronology through which restoration reaches completion and gives way to the everlasting kingdom. Having followed the scriptural testimony through Isaiah, Revelation, and Ezekiel, we now turn to the ancient witnesses announced at the beginning of our investigation. These sources preserve linguistic details, textual traditions, and ancient patterns of interpretation that may illuminate the prophetic record. No single witness will be asked to carry the entire timeline. Each will contribute only what it genuinely preserves. We begin with the Hebrew Scriptures because this is where the prophetic pattern itself is established. Isaiah 65 announces the renewed creation. For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former shall not be remembered, nor come into mind. Isaiah 65:17. Yet, as the vision continues, conditions remain that require careful attention. Isaiah says, There shall be no more thence an infant of days, nor an old man that hath not filled his days, for the child shall die 100 years old. Isaiah 65:20. This is extraordinary longevity, but it is not yet the abolition of death. A person dying at 100 is regarded as dying unusually young. The prophet then describes ordinary embodied life continuing beneath blessing, and they shall build houses and inhabit them, and they shall plant vineyards and eat the fruit of them. Isaiah 65:21. And again, they shall not labor in vain, nor bring forth for trouble, for they are the seed of the blessed of Adonai, and their offspring with them. Isaiah 65:23, houses remain. Cultivation remains, children and descendants remain. Labor remains, but its futility is being removed. Isaiah therefore portrays creation not as abandoned, but as restored. The closing verse adds another important clue. The wolf and the lamb shall feed together, and the lion shall eat straw like the bullock, and dust shall be the serpent's meat. Isaiah 65:25. Predatory violence has been subdued, yet the serpent remains beneath the ancient sign of humiliation first associated with Eden. The Hebrew testimony therefore places extraordinary restoration, continuing mortality, generations cultivation, and the humbled serpent within the same prophetic vision. Ezekiel strengthens this restorative pattern from another direction. In the vision of the dry bones, Adonai declares, Behold, O my people, I will open your graves and cause you to come up out of your graves. Ezekiel 37:12. Restoration then extends to the land, the sanctuary, and the divine presence. When Ezekiel sees the river flowing from the sanctuary, he is told, Everything shall live whither the river cometh. Ezekiel 47:9. The water is actively healing what had been wounded. Life spreads outward from the sanctuary into the land. The closing chapters also preserve inheritance. The land is measured and distributed among the tribes, showing an ordered world in which territory, government, and inheritance remain meaningful. And Ezekiel's final declaration summarizes the restored order. And the name of the city from that day shall be Adonai is there. Ezekiel 48:35. Taken together, Isaiah and Ezekiel establish the foundational pattern of this investigation. Isaiah presents a creation profoundly renewed, while mortality, generations labor, and the humbled serpent remain. Ezekiel presents resurrection, restored land, sanctuary, healing waters, tribal inheritance, and the returning presence of Adonai. The Hebrew prophets therefore give us a world in which restoration is active and visible. Creation is restored before it is perfected. Life is healed before death is finally destroyed. The kingdom is established before it reaches everlasting fullness. This scriptural foundation will now guide our examination of the Peshitta and the remaining ancient witnesses. Having established the Hebrew foundation, the investigation next turns to the Syriac Peshitta. The Peshitta preserves one of the oldest surviving streams of biblical transmission, and its value here is not that it creates a different prophecy, but that it allows us to hear Isaiah's vision through another ancient Semitic witness. Isaiah 65:20 in the Peshitta reads, in English translation, "And there shall not again be an infant of days, or an old man who will not fulfill his days, because a boy shall die a son of 100 years, and whoever sins as a son of 100 years shall be cursed." This is important because the Syriac witness preserves the same tension already present in the Hebrew text. Life is extraordinarily prolonged, yet death remains, the sinner remains distinguishable and can still come under judgment. The Peshitta, therefore, does not erase mortality from Isaiah's renewed creation. The same continuity appears in the next verses. Isaiah 65:21-23 in the Syriac text preserves the building of houses, the planting of vineyards, the enjoyment of their fruit, the labor of the people and their children with them. The Peshitta, therefore, presents the same restored but still developing world. Houses are built, vineyards are cultivated, labor continues beneath blessing, and generations remain. The closing verse preserves another significant detail. Isaiah 65:25 in the Peshitta says that the wolf and lamb feed together, the lion eats straw like the ox, and dust is the serpent's bread. That wording is especially striking. The serpent remains within the vision, but beneath the ancient sign of humiliation. Again, the Syriac witness does not describe the serpent's disappearance. It preserves the same image of restraint and judgment already visible in the Hebrew testimony. The Peshitta therefore confirms several of the central observations of this investigation. Extraordinary longevity remains compatible with mortality. Ordinary embodied life continues beneath blessing. Children and generations remain, and the serpent remains beneath judgment. Its contribution is not to introduce a new prophetic program. It confirms that the same restorative pattern already visible in the Hebrew text remains present within an ancient Semitic transmission. The Peshitta does not create the distinction between restoration and final consummation. It preserves the conditions that make that distinction necessary. Next, we turn to the Septuagint, where the wording of Isaiah 65:20 gives us another valuable comparison. Having examined the Peshitta, the investigation next turns to the Greek Septuagint. The Septuagint is especially valuable because it preserves an ancient Jewish rendering of the Hebrew scriptures from before the later divisions that shaped many subsequent interpretations. Here again, Isaiah 65 gives us the most important evidence. The Septuagint announces, "For there shall be a new heaven and a new earth, and they shall not at all remember the former." Isaiah 65:17, Septuagint. The vision then continues, "Neither shall there be there any more a child that dies untimely, or an old man who shall not complete his time. For the youth shall be 100 years old, and the sinner who dies at 100 years shall also be accursed. Isaiah 65:20 Septuagint. This wording is especially important. The Septuagint still preserves death within the renewed creation. It also preserves judgment upon the sinner. The language differs slightly from the Hebrew rendering, but the central tension remains the same. Life is extraordinarily prolonged, yet death has not been abolished. The next verses preserve the same embodied conditions. They shall build houses, and themselves shall dwell in them, and they shall plant vineyards, and themselves shall eat the fruit thereof. Isaiah 65:21 Septuagint. The Septuagint then adds a particularly striking expression. For as the days of the tree of life shall be the days of my people. Isaiah 65:22 Septuagint. This wording is significant because it intensifies the picture of restored longevity. The people are not presented as immortal, but their days are compared with the tree of life. The same verse continues that they will long enjoy the fruits of their labors, while verse 23 preserves children and descendants within the vision. And the closing image remains, then wolves and lambs shall feed together, and the lion shall eat chaff like the ox, and the serpent earth as bread. Isaiah 65:25 Septuagint. Once again the serpent remains. Its condition is one of humiliation, but not disappearance. The Septuagint therefore preserves the same essential pattern already visible in the Hebrew and Syriac witnesses: extraordinary longevity, continuing mortality, houses and vineyards, children and descendants, restored creation, and the serpent still beneath judgment. Its most distinctive contribution is the phrase, "As the days of the tree of life shall be the days of my people." That expression strengthens the idea of profound restoration toward life, without requiring us to interpret the passage as describing the final abolition of death. The Septuagint, therefore, does not create a different prophetic expectation. It preserves the same tension inside Isaiah's renewed world while adding language that deepens the picture of restored longevity in life. The Hebrew witness speaks of extraordinary lifespan. The Peshitta preserves the same mortality and judgment. The Septuagint compares the days of the people with the tree of life. Together, these witnesses continue to point toward restoration advancing before final consummation. Next, we turn to the Syriac tradition of revelation, where the sequence of restraint, release, judgment, and New Jerusalem can be examined directly. The investigation next turns to the Syriac transmission of revelation. This witness is especially important because revelation provides the clearest chronology for the stages Isaiah presents within one prophetic horizon. The earliest Peshitta New Testament did not include revelation, but the Apocalypse was later transmitted in Syriac tradition. For this reason, we should speak carefully of the Syriac tradition of revelation rather than treating revelation as part of the original Peshitta collection. When we examine Revelation 20 in the Syriac witness, the sequence is explicit. The dragon, identified as the ancient serpent, is bound for 1,000 years and cast into the abyss so that he would not continue deceiving the nations. Yet the same passage immediately adds that afterward, it is granted to release him for a little season. This is the first important chronological distinction. Darkness is restrained. It is not yet permanently destroyed. The same Syriac text continues, whenever the 1,000 years are finished, Satan will be released from his imprisonment. He then goes out again to deceive the nations and gather them for the final rebellion. Only after that rebellion does the adversary receive his irreversible judgment. Their seducer, the devil, was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone. The sequence continues still further. After the judgment of the adversary, Yochanan sees the great white throne, the dead are judged, and finally, death and Sheol were cast into the lake of fire. This is extremely important for our investigation. The 1,000 years occur before the permanent judgment of the adversary. The final rebellion occurs after the 1,000 years. The destruction of death follows the final judgment. Only then does Revelation 21 open with the completed order. The Syriac text says, "And I saw new heavens and a new earth, for the former heavens and the former earth had departed." Yochanan then says, "And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, descending from heaven from beside God, prepared like a bride adorned for her husband. And immediately afterward, from now on there shall not be death." The Syriac witness therefore preserves the chronology with remarkable clarity. Restraint, 1,000 years, release, final rebellion, judgment, destruction of death, new heaven and new earth, descent of New Jerusalem. This is precisely the sequence needed to interpret Isaiah's prophetic horizon. Isaiah gathers extraordinary restoration and final hope within one vision. Revelation separates the stages. The Syriac transmission preserves that separation without collapsing them into one event. Its contribution is therefore chronological. It confirms that the restorative reign and the final consummated order belong to distinct stages within one continuous prophetic purpose. Isaiah presents the horizon, Revelation reveals the sequence. And the Syriac witness preserves that sequence from restraint through testing and judgment into the final order where death is no more. The investigation next turns to the ancient Ethiopian biblical tradition preserved in Ge'ez. This is an important distinction. Ge'ez is the classical Ethiopic language in which the Ethiopian scriptures were transmitted, and surviving manuscripts preserve the book of Isaiah directly in that language. One British library manuscript containing Isaiah dates to the 15th century, demonstrating that the Ge'ez prophetic tradition itself is preserved independently of modern Amharic translations. The Ethiopic Old Testament belongs to an ancient translation tradition that scholars generally trace primarily to the Greek Septuagint, although portions of its textual history also show later revision and interaction with other textual forms. This makes the Ge'ez tradition especially relevant to our investigation. We have already seen that the Septuagint preserves Isaiah 65 as a vision of extraordinary restoration in which mortality nevertheless remains. Human life is dramatically prolonged, houses and vineyards continue, descendants remain, and the serpent is still beneath the sign of humiliation. Because the early Ethiopic Old Testament arose substantially from the Greek biblical tradition, the Ge'ez witness belongs to that ancient stream of transmission rather than to a later modern translation tradition. At this point, however, we must distinguish what has been established from what still requires direct verse-by-verse collation. We have verified the existence of ancient Ge'ez manuscripts of Isaiah, but we have not yet established from a critical transcription whether Isaiah 65, 20, 22, and 25 contain any distinctive Ge'ez wording that differs significantly from the Greek, Hebrew, or Syriac witnesses. Therefore, we will not attribute a unique reading to the Ge'ez text where we have not directly verified one. The Ethiopian witness contributes something different, but still important. It preserves Isaiah within another ancient biblical transmission whose Old Testament stands historically close to the Septuagintal tradition. For the New Testament, we likewise possess early printed editions of the Ge'ez text prepared from Ethiopic manuscripts, including Thomas Pell Platt's 1830 Novum Testamentum Ethiopici. The Ethiopian tradition therefore remains part of our witness map, but with precision. It confirms that the prophetic testimony of Isaiah and Revelation continued within the ancient Ge'ez biblical tradition. What we will not claim without direct textual verification is that Ge'ez preserves a unique lexical detail supporting our chronology. Its value here is as an ancient line of biblical transmission standing alongside the Hebrew, Greek, and Syriac witnesses, while the specific Ge'ez readings remain a subject for further textual comparison. The investigation also considered ancient Jewish writings that preserve expectations of restoration, messianic government, judgment, resurrection, and the world to come. These writings do not present one uniform chronology, and they should not be forced into one. Their value lies in the fact that they preserve distinguishable stages within the future purpose of Adonai. Jubilees 23 is especially important because it preserves a movement from shortened life under corruption toward extraordinary longevity during restoration. After describing the decline of human lifespan, Jubilees says, "The days will begin to grow many and increase, till their days draw nigh to 1,000 years." It continues by describing a condition in which people live in peace and joy, accompanied by blessing and healing. This is striking beside Isaiah 65. Isaiah describes life dramatically prolonged while mortality remains. Jubilees likewise imagines human life being restored toward extraordinary length as corruption is reversed. The parallel does not establish Isaiah's chronology, but it demonstrates that ancient Jewish expectation could conceive of restored longevity as part of a future age of healing. The investigation also considered ancient Jewish writings that preserve expectations of restoration, messianic government, judgment, resurrection, and the world to come. These writings do not present one uniform chronology, and they should not be forced into one. Their value lies in the fact that they preserve distinguishable stages within the future purpose of Adonai. Jubilees 23 is especially important because it preserves a movement from shortened life under corruption toward extraordinary longevity during restoration. After describing the decline of human lifespan, Jubilees says, "The days will begin to grow many and increase, till their days draw nigh to 1,000 years." It continues by describing a condition in which people live in peace and joy, accompanied by blessing and healing. This is striking beside Isaiah 65. Isaiah describes life dramatically prolonged while mortality remains. Jubilees likewise imagines human life being restored toward extraordinary length as corruption is reversed. The parallel does not establish Isaiah's chronology, but it demonstrates that ancient Jewish expectation could conceive of restored longevity as part of a future age of healing. 2. Baruch preserves another powerful restorative picture. When the Anointed One begins to appear, the text describes extraordinary abundance. The earth will also yield fruits 10,000-fold. The same passage speaks of astonishingly fruitful vines, provision for the hungry, and even the return of manna. This is not merely judgment. It is a messianic age in which creation itself responds with abundance. Yet, too, Baruch does not stop with that restorative order. Its following material moves toward resurrection and judgment, showing that messianic restoration and final completion need not be treated as one indistinguishable moment. Academic discussion of 2, Baruch likewise notes its sequence of messianic restoration followed by resurrection and eschatological judgment. Its contribution to our investigation is therefore significant. Restoration can precede final judgment. Messianic abundance can belong to a stage before consummation. 4. Ezra preserves an even more explicit distinction between stages. In its 7th chapter, the Messiah reigns for a defined period before that age itself comes to an end. Afterward, the text moves toward resurrection and judgment. Ancient Jewish scholarship commonly recognizes this as a sequence in which a messianic period precedes the final eschatological order. The importance of this witness is not the precise duration it assigns to the messianic reign. Its importance is structural. The messianic age is not simply identical with final eternity. A period of rule can precede resurrection, judgment, and the completed world to come. Taken together, Jubilees 2, Baruch, and 4, Ezra preserve different pieces of the same broad expectation. Jubilees preserves restored longevity and healing. 2, Baruch preserves messianic abundance followed by later resurrection and judgment. 4, Ezra preserves a distinguishable messianic period before the final eschatological order. None of these writings establishes the chronology of Revelation. But they demonstrate that ancient Jewish expectation could accommodate restoration, messianic rule, resurrection, judgment, and final completion as distinguishable movements within the purpose of Adonai. That makes them valuable witnesses to the prophetic pattern we have already traced through Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Revelation. One important precision for Isaiah, the relevant Aramaic witness, is Targum Jonathan to the Prophets, a synagogue-related interpretive rendering of Isaiah that often expands the Hebrew text rather than translating it word for word. The Targum. The investigation next turns to the Targum, specifically Targum Jonathan to Isaiah. This Aramaic witness is valuable because it preserves not only translation but interpretation. It often makes explicit how ancient Jewish readers understood the prophetic horizon of Isaiah. Isaiah 65 already presents Jerusalem as the center of the renewed order. For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth. Isaiah 65:17. The Targumic tradition reads Isaiah within a broader framework of Zion, restoration, Messiah, divine presence, and the world to come. Modern scholarship on Targum Jonathan notes that these themes are woven throughout its interpretation of Isaiah, especially its treatment of Israel, Zion and Temple, Messiah, and the afterlife. This is important because the Targum frequently refuses to confine prophetic language to the immediate historical moment. Isaiah's promises are often read within a larger messianic horizon. The restoration of Zion is not merely political recovery. The return of divine order is not merely national recovery. The prophetic hope stretches toward the reign of Adonai, the restoration of his people, and the completion of his purposes. That does not mean the Targum gives us the chronology of Revelation. It does not. Its contribution is interpretive. It shows that ancient Jewish readers of Isaiah could recognize a prophetic horizon extending beyond the prophet's immediate historical setting into a larger messianic and restorative future. That matters for our investigation because Isaiah 65 is not being treated as an isolated prediction disconnected from the rest of the prophetic testimony. The Targum preserves a way of reading Isaiah in which Zion, restoration, Messiah, divine presence, and the world to come belong to one unfolding prophetic expectation. Its contribution, therefore, is not to establish the exact sequence from Millennium to final consummation. It is to confirm that Isaiah's language was already being read within a broader messianic horizon, rather than as a prophecy exhausted by one historical event. The Targum helps us see the scope of the vision. Revelation later helps us see its chronology. The investigation then turns to Midrash. Midrash is important here because it often reads Scripture through recurring patterns rather than as isolated verses. In this case, one Midrashic witness is especially relevant because it comments directly on Isaiah 65:25. Isaiah says, "The wolf and the lamb shall feed together, and dust shall be the serpent's food." Isaiah 65:25. Midrash Tanchuma interprets this future scene as a time when the animals are healed, yet the serpent remains under its ancient judgment. One passage explains that the animals will be healed in the coming age, but the serpent shall not be healed because it was responsible for bringing humanity down to the dust. That is significant for our investigation. The Midrash does not treat Isaiah's serpent language as a meaningless poetic detail. It recognizes a distinction inside the restored order. Creation is healed, peace is restored among the animals, yet the serpent remains beneath judgment. This closely parallels the pattern we have already observed in Isaiah itself. Restoration is real, healing is real, but the final removal of every enemy has not yet occurred. Midrash also demonstrates a broader interpretive method that is important for this study. It frequently connects passages across Torah, prophets, and writings in order to trace recurring themes and patterns. In the Isaiah 65 discussion, for example, the serpent's condition is read in relation to Genesis 3 and the original curse, showing that the later prophetic vision is understood through an earlier scriptural pattern. This method resembles the way our investigation has proceeded. One passage introduces the pattern, another preserves its later condition. Another reveals its completion. Midrash therefore contributes in two ways. First, it preserves a direct interpretation of Isaiah 65 in which restoration and the serpent's continuing judgment coexist. Second, it confirms that reading Scripture through connected patterns has deep roots within Jewish interpretation. Its contribution is not to establish the chronology of Revelation. It is to show that ancient Jewish interpreters also recognized that Isaiah's restored world could contain both healing and unresolved judgment at the same time. That makes Midrash an especially valuable witness for the central tension of this investigation. The investigation also considers selected rabbinic writings. These sources preserve centuries of reflection upon the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. Rabbinic interpretation is not uniform, and no single opinion determines the conclusions of this study. Its value appears where rabbinic discussion recognizes tensions already present within Scripture. One especially important example appears in Sanhedrin 91b. The rabbis placed two passages from Isaiah side by side. Isaiah 25:8 declares, "He will swallow up death forever." Yet Isaiah 65:20 says, "The youngest shall die 100 years old." The Talmud recognizes the apparent contradiction and distinguishes between the two prophetic conditions, rather than forcing both passages into one identical moment. Its interpretation is not the same conclusion reached in this investigation, but the structural observation is important. One prophecy describes a condition in which mortality remains, while another speaks of death being removed altogether. Sanhedrin 91b then considers another prophetic tension, this time between Isaiah 30:26 and Isaiah 24:23, and distinguishes between the days of the Messiah and the world to come. Again, the significance lies in the distinction of stages. Rabbinic interpretation could recognize that future prophetic passages need not all describe one undivided condition. Different texts may belong to different stages within the future purpose of Adonai. This is particularly important for Isaiah 65. The continuing mortality in the chapter was not simply ignored because Isaiah elsewhere speaks of death disappearing. The tension was recognized and required explanation. More broadly, rabbinic tradition preserves recurring expectations of the gathering of the people, the restoration of the land, the messianic reign, the healing of creation, and a final condition beyond ordinary mortality. Rabbinic interpretation, therefore, does not establish the chronology of this study. Its contribution is more specific. It independently recognizes that Isaiah contains different future conditions that should not simply be collapsed into one moment. For that reason, Sanhedrin 91b becomes one of the strongest rabbinic witnesses in this investigation. The final witness considered in this investigation is the Zohar. Its symbolic language frequently explores exile and restoration, the Shekinah, Jerusalem, Malkut, and the return of divine order. One of its clearest recurring themes is that the Shekinah accompanies Israel into exile and is restored with them. In Zohar, Emor 11:37, the text presents Israel entering exile together with the Shekinah, and their deliverance is associated with the return of the divine presence. At the immediate level, Israel refers to the covenant people descended from Jacob. The passage itself does not identify Israel specifically with Joseph, Ephraim, or the northern kingdom. Yet another Zoharic passage opens a deeper dimension. In Zohar, Shemot 2:13, while reflecting upon Jacob's descent into Egypt, the children of Israel are interpreted on a supernal level, with heavenly hosts and chariots associated with the descent of Jacob and the Shekinah into exile. This adds an important layer to the pattern. The people descend below. The Shekinah descends with them, and the Zohar preserves a corresponding heavenly company participating in that descent. Exile, therefore, appears not merely as the movement of an earthly people from one land into another, but as an event possessing both an earthly and a supernal dimension. We must be careful not to make the text say more than it does. The Zohar does not identify these heavenly hosts by the terminology we may investigate elsewhere, nor does this passage alone explain their complete identity or purpose. But the pattern itself is significant. The same movement continues in Tikkunei Zohar, where the Shekinah is portrayed in exile and awaiting redemption. Here the eagle imagery becomes especially important. Tikkunei Zohar 22 portrays the higher Shekinah through the image of an eagle arousing her nest, and associates the nest with Jerusalem. The passage itself then draws upon the language of Deuteronomy 32:11, where the eagle stirs her nest, hovers over her young, spreads her wings, takes them, and carries them. The connection is remarkable because the maternal eagle pattern is already present within the Hebrew Scriptures. Deuteronomy 32:11 declares, "As an eagle stirreth up her nest, fluttereth over her young, spreadeth abroad her wings, taketh them, beareth them on her wings." And Exodus 19:4 preserves the same pattern when Adonai says, "Ye have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle's wings, and brought you unto myself." Tikkun Zohar therefore does more than introduce an unrelated mystical symbol. It takes an eagle and nest pattern already embedded in the Hebrew testimony and explicitly associates the higher Shekinah with that eagle imagery. The correspondence becomes clearer. The higher Shekinah is portrayed through the image of the eagle. Jerusalem is associated with her nest. The young are beneath her care. Her wings protect and carry, and the movement leads from exile toward restoration. The same symbolic field appears again in Revelation 12:14, where the woman receives 2 wings of a great eagle so that she may fly into the wilderness to the place prepared for her. Revelation does not explicitly insert the word Shekinah into that verse, and we should distinguish what the text states directly from the identification produced through comparison. Nevertheless, the correspondence is important. The Hebrew Scriptures present the maternal eagle stirring her nest and carrying her young. Tikkun Zohar explicitly associates the higher Shekinah with that eagle imagery and Jerusalem with the nest. Revelation presents the woman receiving the wings of the great eagle and being carried into the wilderness. These witnesses therefore preserve a remarkable recurring pattern of mother, eagle, wings, young, wilderness, protection, and restoration. The movement is therefore not merely exile, then return. It is. The Shekinah descends into exile, divine presence becomes concealed, the eagle's nest is awakened, the household is gathered and protected, Jerusalem awakens, Malkut is restored, divine order returns. This connection between Shekinah and Malkut is especially important. Within the Zoharic world, the exile of the Shekinah affects the manifestation of the kingdom itself. When the divine presence is concealed in exile, Malkut is not manifested in its fullness. Her restoration therefore concerns more than political recovery or the restoration of territory. It concerns the restoration of divine presence within creation. The restoration of Jerusalem, the restoration of Malkut, and the return of sacred order beneath divine government. This closely echoes the pattern already encountered in Isaiah and Ezekiel. Restoration is not merely the repair of land, it is the reordering of creation beneath the returning presence and government of Adonai. The Zohar therefore contributes an important symbolic and structural witness. Earthly exile, Shekinah accompanying the exile, a supernal company associated with the descent, concealed divine presence, awakening of the eagle's nest, redemption of the Shekinah, restoration of Jerusalem and Malkut, return of divine order. The Zohar does not give us the chronology supplied by Revelation. It does not establish the 1,000 years, the final release of the adversary, or the exact point at which death is destroyed. Its contribution is different. It preserves the relationship between exile, divine presence, Jerusalem, Malkut, and restoration, while also introducing a supernal dimension associated with the descent into exile. That final detail also touches a subject we have encountered several times in previous investigations, the children of the exile. When the understanding concerning these children first emerged through the guidance of the Ruah, we began searching the written testimony for confirmation. Certain scriptural and ancient witnesses provided important pieces of the pattern, but the investigation was never completed. The material encountered here adds another remarkable piece. The Zohar preserves the descent of the Shekinah into exile, and in Shemot 2:13 introduces a corresponding supernal company associated with that descent. We should not immediately identify that heavenly company with the children of the exile, because the Zohar itself does not make that identification. But neither should we overlook the correspondence. It raises precisely the questions that remain open from our earlier studies. Who is this heavenly company associated with the Shekinah's descent? Why do they descend with her? What relationship do they bear to her exile? And what becomes of them when the Shekinah is redeemed and returns from exile? These questions deserve their own investigation. For now, we will preserve this discovery as another important witness and return to it when we continue the investigation concerning the children of the exile, comparing what was understood through the Ruah with the Hebrew scriptures, the rabbinic witnesses, the Zohar, and the other ancient testimony. We will allow that investigation to determine how these pieces belong together rather than reaching the conclusion prematurely. For the present study, the Zohar contributes a clear witness that restoration has both earthly and supernal dimensions, and that the restoration of the Shekinah is inseparably connected with the awakening of Jerusalem, the restoration of Malkut, and the return of divine order. Having examined the Hebrew scriptures, the Peshitta, the Septuagint, the Syriac tradition, the Ethiopian scriptures, the ancient Jewish writings, the Targum, Midrash, rabbinic interpretation, and the Zohar, a consistent picture emerges. No single witness presents the entire prophetic timeline. Each preserves a portion of the testimony. The Hebrew prophets establish the pattern of restoration. The Peshitta and Septuagint preserve the same tension of extraordinary longevity, continuing mortality, embodied life, and the humbled serpent. The Syriac tradition of revelation preserves the chronological sequence of restraint, release, final judgment, the destruction of death, and the descent of New Jerusalem. The Ethiopian biblical witness preserves the same broad movement from restoration toward final completion. Jubilees preserves restored longevity. 2. Baruch preserves messianic abundance before later resurrection and judgment. 4. Ezra preserves a distinguishable messianic period before the final eschatological order. The Targum preserves a broader messianic horizon. Midrash preserves the striking coexistence of healing and the serpent remaining under judgment. Rabbinic interpretation explicitly recognizes the tension between Isaiah 65, where death remains, and Isaiah 25, where death is swallowed up forever. And the Zohar preserves the exile and restoration of the Shekinah, the awakening of Jerusalem, the restoration of Malkut, and the return of divine order. Their significance lies in convergence. They do not all say the same thing. They do not all preserve the same chronology. But together they illuminate a recurring prophetic movement. Restoration before perfection, extended life before the destruction of death, restraint before irreversible judgment, messianic government before final consummation, exile before the restoration of divine presence and order. The ancient witnesses, therefore, do not create the conclusion of this investigation. They strengthen and illuminate the pattern already established through Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Revelation. With the witnesses now heard, we can gather the final conclusions of the investigation. Now, having followed the testimony from Isaiah through Revelation, Ezekiel, and the ancient witnesses, the prophetic order becomes clearer. Isaiah describes creation under restoration. Human life is greatly prolonged. Families continue. Houses and vineyards remain. Labor becomes fruitful. The land is healed, and peace begins to govern creation, yet death remains. Judgment remains. These conditions belong neither to the present fallen world as we know it, nor to the final eternal condition in which death has disappeared forever. They point toward a restorative kingdom in which creation has been profoundly healed while final consummation still lies ahead. Revelation then supplies the chronology. Darkness is restrained from deceiving the nations during the 1,000 years, but it has not yet been permanently destroyed. At the conclusion of that reign, the adversary is released for the final testing. The last rebellion exposes what remains, judgment follows, and death itself is destroyed. Only then does the final order appear. There are not 2 new heavens and new earths. There is one final renewed creation, appearing after the restorative work has reached completion, and every remaining enemy has received irreversible judgment. Ezekiel strengthens the restorative stage from another direction. Resurrection, restored land, returning glory, sanctuary, healing waters, and tribal inheritance all belong within a world being reordered beneath the presence and government of Adonai. Revelation carries the prophetic movement beyond that restoration into the completed kingdom where New Jerusalem descends as the bride, the wife of the Lamb, and the everlasting dwelling of the divine household. During the Millennium, Malkut is the encompassing restorative kingdom. The male Messiah reigns within it with his wife, and their distinct royal offices work together in gathering, healing, instructing, judging, and ordering creation. The full and irreversible union of the kingdom belongs beyond the restorative age, when darkness has received final judgment, death has been destroyed, and division can no longer rise again. The ancient witnesses do not each preserve the entire prophetic timeline. Instead, they preserve different elements of the same larger pattern: prolonged life, restored creation, messianic abundance, stages of restoration and judgment, the serpent remaining beneath humiliation, the distinction between messianic restoration and final perfection, and the exile and restoration of the Shekinah and Malkut. Their strength lies in the convergence of what they genuinely preserve, not in forcing them to say the same thing. The investigation therefore leads to one coherent conclusion. Isaiah presents restoration and consummation within one prophetic horizon, while Revelation reveals the sequence between them. The Millennium restores, governs, and tests creation. Final judgment removes every remaining enemy. New Jerusalem then descends, and the one everlasting new heaven and new earth appear in complete and irreversible victory. This brings us back to the interpretive principle that guided the investigation from the beginning. Prophetic proximity does not always mean chronological proximity. A prophet may behold events beside one another within a single vision, even when those events belong to different stages of Adonai's unfolding purpose. Recognizing that principle allows Isaiah, Ezekiel, Revelation, and the ancient witnesses to stand together without erasing the distinctive testimony of any one of them. This investigation has followed the internal characteristics of Isaiah's vision together with the chronology revealed through Revelation. It has traced one continuous prophetic movement from restoration to consummation without forcing every stage into one moment. We conclude this investigation here. In future studies, we will continue examining Scripture through the Hebrew testimony, the ancient witnesses, and the guidance of the Ruah, allowing each investigation to deepen our understanding of the prophetic order and the everlasting purpose of Adonai. The Lord bless thee and keep thee. The Lord make his face shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. The Lord lift up his countenance upon thee and give thee peace. Shalom.
The kingdom has begun.